The reason you're here, though, is because there's a special man in the room that you guys would really like to know more. I've only known him for a couple of hours, and he's so interesting, but also incredibly dear and good-hearted, and so that doesn't necessarily always come with a great researcher. I learned of a new concept from a book about animal senses recently, and it seems that each species has a unique perceptual reality called an umwelt. Most of us know about snakes seeing infrared and dogs being able to smell incredibly, right? But we're unfamiliar with the vastly different sensory experience of animals like that of a scallop, of all things, that has dozens of eyes that can detect movement. Do you ever think that your scallops are looking back at you? Others, such as elephants, call to each other using infrasonic mooing, sounds imperceptible to human ears. And all around us, there's a world exists that we simply do not register. And what evidently was not included in the perceptual reality of most of us in our umwelt is the long plot and ongoing execution of a plan to rob us of our freedoms. Most of us have been at least somewhat oblivious to its depth and complexity because it is in some ways unimaginable that such maliciousness and greed flourish in broad daylight. But it is unfolding in plain sight. Your country and its management are becoming unrecognizable because, according to tonight's speaker, the levels and layers of control are configured in fancy boardrooms far away from the eyes and ears of the average Joe and Jane. If you feel like you're living in someone else's play, it's because, in many ways, we are. Many of you had the pleasure of being with us when we heard from Eric Eggers and Luke Rosiak. Tonight, we welcome our third speaker from Peter Schweizer's Government Accountability Institute. We hope one day Peter will visit the forum and see what all this fuss is about in California. But in the meantime, we are delighted to host Seamus tonight. Seamus Bruner is the Vice President and Executive Director of Research and at the Government Accountability Institute. He's worked with GAI President Peter Schweizer since 2011, providing path-breaking research that has appeared on the front pages of virtually every media outlet, kicking off multiple FBI and congressional investigations into political elites. Seamus's third and very well-researched book that I held up a minute ago, Controligarchs, on sale here tonight, follows his two others, Compromised and Fallout. If you are up to no good, you might want to leave now. As with tonight's guest's exceptional research skills, he may just as well have a dozen eyes. Please help me welcome to the forum, Seamus Bruner.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jane. I have never been compared to a scallop or been more honored to have been compared to a scallop, so thank you for that. And thank you, Alex, for hosting me. You're just wonderful. It was very nice to stay with you. And thank you to all the Liberty Forum volunteers for your hard work tonight and every night. It's really a pleasure and honor. I'm humbled to be here in front of you all. And as Jane mentioned, I've worked with a guy named Peter Schweizer. Does anybody here know who Peter Schweizer is? Yeah, he's a national treasure. He's a hero. He's my personal mentor. I've been with him for over a decade. He taught me everything I know, and he's a real gem. And I'll be pushing hard to have him come out and speak to you all. So the first book I worked on for Peter Schweizer was called Throw Them All Out. Did anybody read that book, Throw Them All Out? It's appropriately titled, right? It looks at the insider stock trades. It first exposed the insider trading that we have going on in Congress that still goes on to this day. So we exposed stock queen Nancy Pelosi and many others and all the tens of millions of dollars they make off of legislation that should be illegal. You and I would go to prison if we did insider trading. Of course, they just get promoted and richer and richer. My favorite book of Schweizer's that I worked on was called Clinton Cash. Did anybody read Clinton Cash? So I'm the nerd that Peter Schweizer gives a stack of Clinton Foundation 990s to and says, make sense of this. And I take all thousands of pages of their speeches and their foundation payments, and I put them into a spreadsheet, and I sort them and filter them, and eventually things like a $500,000 speech that Bill Clinton gave in Moscow will come out, and then we go and look at what was going on at the State Department when Bill Clinton got paid $500,000 by the Russians. And sure enough, Hillary Clinton's State Department is approving a uranium transfer to the Russian state-owned nuclear agency. So, so many other examples. Haiti, they plundered Haiti. We all know how bad the Clintons are at plundering various places. But that book led to multiple FBI field office investigations. 5 FBI field offices opened investigations into the Clinton Foundation, to the pay-to-play schemes. And what happened then? They just mysteriously went away. These investigations just vanished. And that got me thinking, who the heck made these things disappear? We all know by now the name James Comey, Andrew McCabe, and Peter Strzok, and Lisa. So I wrote a book called Compromised: How Money and Politics Drive FBI Corruption. It was my thesis long ago, this is back in 2017, that the Department of Justice is the beating heart of the swamp that needs to be drained, and it still is the beating heart of the swamp. But lots of problems still at the FBI. We did a few books on the Biden family. We first exposed how Hunter Biden was getting paid $1 million a year in Ukraine. That's now what the oversight is looking into, how Joe Biden committed bribery. A lot of people don't know that Joe Biden is guilty of bribery under 18 U.S.C. Section 201. It does not require that money went into a person's account. All that is required under 18 U.S.C. is anything of value for any official action. The thing of value is the $1 million a year going to Hunter, and the official action is Joe Biden, who has admitted on camera he used the office of the vice presidency to get the prosecutor in Ukraine fired. So we all know this. This is sort of ancient history, but Congress doesn't seem to realize that everything for impeachment is already there. Case closed, smoking gun. Controligarchs. This is, I think, the most ambitious project we have yet, because the political class, I think we've all started to feel that Joe Biden is not making decisions. A lot of our politicians, it's kind of like a clown show in Washington. Both sides, just food fights and nothing really serious going on except for plundering our coffers and shipping it off to Ukraine, or funding the invasion at the southern border, all with your money, your hard-earned money. But they're not making those decisions. And so, our motto is follow the money. We followed it to the Clintons, we followed it to the FBI and the DOJ. And so I thought, why not follow it all the way to the top? And so Controligarchs is it's a book about technocracy, eugenics, depopulation, transhumanism, dystopia, which are obviously fun and uplifting topics. It's heavy stuff, and the central thesis of it is that everything that you eat, everything you drink, what you drive, the temperature that you control your house, what you read, what you write, what you watch, what you think, especially what you think, must be controlled by a group of sometimes faceless, nameless oligarchs, but they also do have names and faces. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, people who I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with. Klaus Schwab, some other people, BlackRock, you've heard of BlackRock. All of these entities, they fly to Davos every year and they plot and scheme how to dominate every aspect of our lives. And a lot of this sounded like conspiracy theory a couple of years ago, things like central bank digital currencies, digital IDs, teaching kids, brainwashing kids in school. If you talked about this, people would call you crazy. But I think the pandemic showed us that you're not crazy. It's actually going on. They want to decide what you can put into your bodies, what you must put into your bodies. And so we're really in a brave new world, which reminds me that approximately 60 years ago, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, came to San Francisco and he gave a speech called Man and Civilization, and he talked about the final revolution. And in this final revolution, he says there will be pharmacological methods to make people love their servitude. Drugs to make, and he talks about the drug Soma in Brave New World. But he says that it will basically be walking into a painless concentration camp. And so that sort of tells you this has been going on for a very long time. Aldous Huxley, his brother Julian Huxley, who was very involved in the United Nations. Julian Huxley coined the term transhumanism 70 years ago. These plans have been in the work for a very long time. And so the book, it opens it with a chapter called The Good Club. Is anybody familiar with a club called The Good Club? Has anybody heard of The Good Club? Well, it's probably the most elite and exclusive club that you've never heard of. It's got Oprah Winfrey, it's got George Soros, it's got Bill Gates, David Rockefeller, several Wall Street executives. And this club met in May 2009 at Rockefeller University in New York. And so the context for the meeting is that Barack Obama had just been elected. They had all spent enormous sums getting him there. And they say to themselves, what are we going to do with this moment? We've got the White House. We've got a lot of Congress. We're going to get some things done here. And so they decide, they're debating. They can't all come to an agreement. What should we pool our resources to fund? And they, some of them say climate change. Some of them say birth control and women's health and abortion. Some of them say hunger and poverty. But Bill Gates really sets the tone. He was the host, and he said, no, the number one problem facing humanity is overpopulation. And so we need to do something about this overpopulation. And so this is a decade before the pandemic. The Rockefeller Foundation springs into work. They have their pandemic planning sessions in 2012. You've heard of the lockstep memo, where they basically laid out the entire pandemic a decade before it. And I don't get into in the book whether or not it was intentionally released or leaked from a lab or came from nature, but I don't really think you have to. The point is, they prepared for a pandemic, and they were well positioned to profit from one. And by the way, Bill Gates' most recent book is titled The Next Pandemic. Everybody here is aware that they are already talking about the next pandemic. So a lot of people say to me, why are you talking about COVID? Why do you have a book about COVID? COVID's over. No, COVID was only the beginning. COVID was a blueprint for the future. And so you look at what the Rockefeller Foundation had been doing for the past 100 years. It's all documented in the book. They were the biggest funders of eugenics projects. They taught the Nazis how to do eugenics. The Rockefeller Foundation scientists, this is 80 years ago, go over to Germany and inform the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute how to root out less than desirable individuals and demographics. So that's how long they've been working on this. They were the largest funders of Margaret Sanger before Planned Parenthood, the largest funders of Planned Parenthood every single year since. And they actually profit from, by the way, abortion. The pill mifepristone, if you're familiar with that. George Soros, Warren Buffett, Rockefellers, they set up a secret Cayman Islands shell corporation in order to profit from the pill that is the most common method of abortion. So I think whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, you can agree that billionaires getting rich off of the painful process of killing a baby is pretty grotesque. But anyway, I digress. They are very much anti-human. This is not a book. This is not about politics. This is not about partisanship. These are existential issues. And so, in addition to the war on humanity, they're waging war on farmers. And so the pandemic was, when we get through to the pandemic, everybody here has heard of Klaus Schwab's Great Reset by now, right? Yeah, the Great Reset, a lot of people think that was about shutting off the economy, turning it back on. You're familiar with Build Back Better, but there's some things that Klaus Schwab mentions in his Great Reset book and his speech that often get overlooked. And number one is building back in a greener way. So the Great Reset, what does a pandemic have to do with climate change, right? Well, they're using it as an excuse. I think in California, you know this probably better than most states, that climate change is everywhere. It's no longer climate change, it's the climate crisis. And that's because every crisis is an opportunity for these guys. But that's the climate crisis means that what you eat, shouldn't be able to eat meat. You have to eat lab-grown meat. You have to eat bugs. It's not a joke. They're seriously pushing that. In Ireland, they're preparing to slaughter hundreds of thousands of cattle because of the methane emissions from cows, which is probably the best way to get the most protein to the most people. And then growing it in a lab is just crazy because it's an enormous use of energy. And really, so that's the war on farmers comes out of the Great Reset. You see it happening all around you. You see it in Europe. If anybody here knows a farmer, it's hard to you can't really be a farmer nowadays. You can't turn a profit. You can't make money. You eventually have these generation-owned farms going out of business. And in Europe, it's the same thing. It's all under the guise of the climate crisis, so-called climate crisis. And really what that is about is patents. That they want to patent the food. We've all heard over the years about the seeds and Monsanto. They've got patents on the seas. Who'd have thunk that food can be patented? But of course, these guys will find a way. And what I discovered, and some of you guys may know this story, I'm honored to be in this audience because Californians know, you're in Silicon Valley, you know what these guys have been doing for decades really. But does anybody know about Bill Gates' embrace, extend, extinguish strategy, Microsoft? So in the 90s, when Bill Gates and Microsoft got into trouble with antitrust regulators, the DOJ found that Microsoft had a strategy. It was called embrace, extend, extinguish. And so what would happen is Microsoft would enter an industry. This had 3 phases. In the embrace phase, Microsoft would enter an industry, the internet browser industry, for example, and they would just say, hey, nothing to see here. We're just expanding our offerings. We're in the embrace phase. Then they would extend, and they would put their browser, Internet Explorer, on every single computer. You couldn't really decide whether you wanted it or not. And then came the extinguish phase, and that's where they would put the competition out of business. And so the competition would be Netscape, and they would make changes to the tech and to how browsers operated so that Netscape had to go out of business. Bill Gates said cut off their air supply. So that's what he's doing with the farmers. First, in the embrace phase, he just starts in buying up all the farmland. He's now the largest farmland owner in the United States, the largest individual owner. He's got close to 300,000 acres. He says, nothing to see here, I'm just diversifying my holdings. That's the expand phase. Then he invests in fake meat companies, things like Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods. He invests in all the fertilizer companies. I mean, he's got dozens, I've calculated $11.7 billion in food and agriculture investments, which is, even for these guys, no small sum. And then now is what we're seeing is the extinguish phase. They push for changes. He and his multinational World Economic Forum conglomerate buddies push for changes in the regulations on farmers that cut off their air supply. And he does it in a lot of other ways too. You saw it during the pandemic, the investing in proprietary, and all of these things are patented, by the way. The proteins, they're patented. The fertilizers, they're patented, and that is a 20-year-long monopoly. These guys love to control the market. And so, you know, with the fertilizers, they are not cleaner or greener fertilizers, and farmers know better than just about anyone how to conserve and to be good environmentalists. If they poison their land, no more food. So it's a total hoax when they say that the farmers are ruining the planet or cows are producing too much methane. But that's just one industry. During the pandemic, you know, all the vaccines, they're all patented. And there was a big movement to make the mRNA vaccines open source so that poor countries could have them. Bill Gates, Pfizer, Moderna, they all pushed back and said, no, these need to stay patented, and they fought making it open source. And that's exactly why ivermectin and any other treatments were banned, is because any competition to the vaccines means less power, less control for people like Bill Gates. So and Amazon is the same way. Amazon, you know, they're both up in Seattle. Actually, Amazon got a lot of seed money from Microsoft. That's what Jeff Bezos is doing with all your, you know, family-owned small businesses. He's cutting off their air supply, making it impossible to operate. And so they're consolidating ownership of everything into just a few hands. The Great Reset also said that we need to digitalize everything. And what does that mean? Like digitalize, you know, and Klaus Schwab elaborates. Most people don't hear about this, but they need to digitalize education. That means putting laptops in front of every single kid, putting social emotional learning software, which is basically DEI for children, on every single computer, and kids are not learning reading and writing and arithmetic. They're learning how to be good, woke little robots, which is tragic. We're losing entire generations of children through the digitalization of education. It also means ID. You need a digital ID. And the end goal here, by the way, is a social credit score, and we are already there. We are very close to having a social credit score. If anybody here buys ammo or guns or anything that they deem to be a conservative type thing or a liberty-minded type thing, they would be put on a list. Visa, MasterCard, all the credit card companies are in bed. They're all World Economic Forum members. They're building profiles on you right now, determining what level of a threat you are. And the digital ID, I mean, you can see in China, like what that can lead to is freedom. In fact, you know here what a digital ID can do. If you didn't have your vaccine passport, you couldn't go into a restaurant. I know that it's in New York. I don't know if that was the case in California, but in New York, I didn't have my vaccine card. I couldn't go to the restaurant. I couldn't go to any events. And they basically cut you out of society. It's the same thing in China. If you are a dissident in any way, I mean, if they don't round you up and just throw you in jail, your freedom to move is severely curtailed. And that is exactly what they want to bring here. They want to bring it worldwide. They talk about it very openly at the World Economic Forum. And the other thing they want to digitalize is your currency, and that is game over. Once they get the central bank digital currency, they can shut down your cash, your account, just seize it, just freeze it with a flick of a switch. This entire room they could shut off with a flick of a switch. They could shut off an entire country with the flick of a switch. And so the Bank of International Settlements, which is like the central banker's central bank, it's headquartered in Switzerland. It's where all the central bankers go to meet and talk about policy. They're actually quite transparent. There's videos out there. You can find the links in the book where they talk about the whole point of a central bank digital currency is about control. They say if you have $100, well, you can't track where that $100 bill floats through the economy. And they use, you know, the worst, scariest examples, drug dealers or prostitution or whatever it may be, as a reason that they need to get rid of cash. But really the reason they need to get rid of cash is because they want to know what all of us are spending our money on. And a lot of people think, well, don't we have a digital currency now? I use my card, I use Zelle or Apple Pay or whatever. No, we have a cash-based system, and even though 2%, just 2% of our cash, of our currency is in cash, that 2% confounds the whole ability to use AI, to process, to track, to build profiles on everybody. And I would encourage you to use cash more if you can, because that really confounds their system. So it's a good thing to have cash. And then, again, like I said, the ultimate goal is the social credit score and artificial intelligence. This is what Klaus Schwab calls the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution is not like the third or the previous industrial revolutions, the computing revolution, not like that. This is the AI, this is the transhumanism, these are the brain-computer interfaces like Elon Musk's Neuralink. All of that is building towards this man-machine merger, which they're fully, we were just having dinner before this, and there's, I guess, a Singularity University event, and I'm looking at it, and there are dozens, if not over 100 people who are enthusiastically plotting the singularity, which is the merger of man with machine, which this all sounds like science fiction, but it's not, it's here. Elon Musk's Neuralink just injected its first patient. Did anybody see the video? And it's really inspiring stuff, actually. It was a paraplegic man who had not been able to move, and he was able to play chess just by thinking it. And before that, I mean, Elon Musk had to go through thousands and thousands of monkeys and sheep and rabbit who all had to be euthanized. I mean, it was pretty gruesome stuff. Reuters did an investigation of all the test subjects, and Elon would get up and say, well, the monkey is thrilled to have this chip put into his brain. You can tell because we give him a banana smoothie and it's very happy. What Reuters found is that dozens and hundreds of thousands of these animals were chewing off their fingers and their toes, bashing their heads against the cages. Obviously, it's not natural to link your brain to a computer. And they start, of course, with the most emotionally appealing case, quadriplegics. And I'm in favor of someone who hasn't been able to walk or move doing that. But we're not really thinking this through. We're sort of rushing headlong into this artificial intelligence revolution. And what's really coming from AI is that it's a socialism machine. And so you need to see what's going to come from this. They say massive job losses. All of the guys out there in Mountain View and Silicon Valley all predict massive job losses. We need to listen to them. They're very excited about it, by the way. So Sam Altman of OpenAI, ChatGPT maker, he's funding the largest study into universal basic income that's ever been done before. And trust me, you're going to hear more and more people demanding universal basic income. Why? Because as more and more people are put out of work, can't find a job, they don't know how to code the robots, they're going to need money, they're going to need checks. And once you get the check, then you're completely beholden to them. And so AI really accomplishes so many of the Great Reset goals because first of all, you're going to need, Sam Altman says, you'll need a digital ID in order to get your checks. You'll need a central bank digital currency to make that money flow faster. And then once you are on those checks and once you have a central bank digital currency, they will be able to shut you down. And you saw this January 6 protesters. They were all, their banks, Bank of America in particular, turned over all their information. They were totally frozen or put on no-fly lists. I mean, so if you're thinking that this can't happen, it is happening right now. The chapter is called the dystopian present. We all think of dystopia like it's something far off in the future. We'll know when we get there. We're there now. You look at the Canadian truckers. All of their assets were frozen just for protesting mandates. So if you didn't want to put an experimental drug technology, gene editing type thing in your body, we don't know what it does yet in a long-term sense. If you didn't want to do that, your money gets frozen if you protest it. That's where we are. That's where Canada is. You just had, in Ireland, you had a bunch of protesters upset about an Algerian migrant who stabbed someone to death. The Irish lawmakers were saying we need to seize their money, seize their entitlements. They were passing laws throwing people in jail for protesting against it. And so once you're out of work, I mean, and we saw this during the pandemic too. If your job tells you that you're fired if you don't do this, millions and millions of people did it. Our families did it, we did it, friends of ours did it. Because if they threaten your livelihood like that, there's really no telling, and like putting food on the table for your family, there's really no telling what you'll do. So everybody will accept the digital ID, everybody will accept central bank digital currencies, and if you're out of a job, you'll accept just about anything for some relief. And so that's really what Klaus Schwab's fourth industrial revolution is about. He's got this visionary, Yuval Noah Harari. Has everybody seen the videos of this guy? Yeah, what he says we're heading for is an entire class of useless people. Useless. I mean, they're very callous about how they talk about us. Like, we're people with, jobs and friends and families. They view us as useless. We're no use to them. What does he say that we're going to? What do we do with all these useless people? I mean, they don't really get into the depopulation that is talked about at meetings of the Good Club, but they say, well, we'll just placate them with drugs and video games. And you can kind of see how that's already happening. You see lots of people taking lots of drugs. Video games are hugely on the rise. Things like metaverse, I mean, I'm sure no one in this room is going to use the metaverse, but you'd be shocked the number of people who will, and maybe you wouldn't be shocked because, the amount of screen time that even, we ourselves are doing is totally on the rise. But kids are completely addicted to the social media apps. And as the economy gets bleaker and as life gets more dismal, you'll find more and more people just glued to their screens and eventually their headsets. The metaverse, the Oculus by Facebook sort of has flopped. It's pretty popular with teens, but you're going to see with the Apple Vision Pro sort of this augmented reality where it's not quite you're having your vision totally blinded. You can see, and Microsoft is working on HoloLens, which is a pair of glasses. Google obviously had Google Glass. The augmented reality, I mean, you see people with AirPods in their ears everywhere all the time. It'll be the same thing with the glasses. And so, I mean, the dystopia is here. It's like a mixture of The Matrix and Brave New World and hopefully not Soylent Green. But the lab-grown meat is pretty gross, the cultured cells and all of that. So, I mean, it's here now. We really need to wake up everyone we know. This book is not a political book. It does not really get into political parties and who's to blame. Because these are existential issues. These are not political issues. And so there's a number of solutions. I mean, I got to the end of the book and I was like, and I told Jane I would actually read. So in chapter 10, the end game, I'll give you a spoiler. The end game is the Chinese-style social credit score system. A lot of people, my boss, Peter Schweizer, he talks about China, and China is our enemy, and China is our adversary, and we all in this room agree with that. But not so for these guys. China is not the enemy of Bill Gates or Anthony Fauci or any of these billionaires and bureaucrats. China is their friend, their partner, their ally. And so when we say we need to get tough on China, same thing with our political class. We know Joe Biden is totally compromised. We know Mitch McConnell is totally compromised. We expose that in the Secret Empires book. Both parties totally compromised by China. They actually view China as a partner and friend, and that seems so foreign to us. Like, how could that be? Are they traitors? No, China is the system that they want to implement here. It's this mixture of capitalism and communism that works really good for the 1%, the political and the elite class, and then everyone else is a peasant. And so we actually have much more in common with the average Chinese citizen, victims of the Chinese Communist Party, than we do with our leaders. And our leaders have much more in common with Xi Jinping than they do with us. So it's really them against us. And so the end game, I mean, I list out, some of you have read this before, but it's 20 Communist Party goals, and this was published in the Congressional Record in 1950. And so I'll just read, and you tell me how far along you think they're doing. Goal number 1, infiltrate and gain control of big businesses and unions. Number 2, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the American founding fathers as selfish aristocrats and racists. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Get control of the schools and teachers associations and soften the curriculum. Gain control of all student newspapers. Infiltrate the press. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and pictures. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and press. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in the media. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. Belittle American culture and discourage the teaching of American history. Discredit the FBI. They're pretty discredited, I'd say. Transfer some of the powers of arrest from police to social agencies. This would be like the Child Protective Services. Treat all behavioral problems as mental health or social problems. Repeal the Connolly Reservation, which is before my time, but allow a world court jurisdiction over nations and individuals. We've got a number of those type of organizations. And grant recognition of Red China and its admission to the UN. So that was 70 years ago. This has all been long in the works. I think they're doing quite well. I think they should take a victory lap. Same thing with the depopulation crowd. The birth rates are at record lows. If you ask people my age, a lot of people, too many people, if they're going to have kids, I ask my friends, no, having kids isn't for me. They've been very successful. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, a lot of these other elite foundations have been very successful in convincing people that having kids is not for them. There's actually, I just saw the other day, a Stop Having Kids movement, and they're putting billboards up all over the country, stop having kids. I sent it to one of my left-wing friends, and he was sort of shocked himself. So they should be taking victory laps, but Bill Gates is still out there saying that the earth is overpopulated, 10 to 15% reduction, which is probably one of the more conservative reductions from these guys. Ted Turner thinks that 1 billion people is the maximum capacity of the world. Dr. Jane Goodall, the gorilla lady, she at the World Economic Forum says 500 million. They believe that around 2 to 4 billion tops. And so it's like, we're at 9, what are they going to do? They don't tell you what they're going to do, but just know that's what they speak quite candidly about the ideal numbers. And so they are completely, it's not just a war on farmers, it's not just a war on cash, it's not just a war on the truth or the war on the family or war on religion or children. It's a war against humanity. These people are anti-human, and transhumanism is very important to know. This metaverse and this man-machine merger that they're all working towards, the singularity just down the road. This is about getting to a post-human world, and it's shocking stuff. I mean, but you can't really deny it. And so the book has got close to 100 pages of endnotes, 70-something pages of endnotes, over 1,000, something like 1,200 endnotes. They're all the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.org, and they're all in their own words. I guess I'll close with a quote from David Rockefeller. And so, by the way, the number one goal of these guys, and I lay it out in too many examples to count, is to transfer power and control away from you and away from this country and to international organizations that they control. And so that's the United Nations, that's the World Bank, that's the World Health Organization, this pandemic treaty that they're going to keep trying to cram down our throats. That is what this is all about, is transferring control from the people, from the countries, to international institutions controlled by them and where they're unelected. These are all unelected. Nobody elected Bill Gates. That's kind of the point. They love being unelected and therefore unaccountable. And so there's a quote that shocked me. When I read it, I couldn't believe it, because you see all these quotes flying around the internet and you don't know, is that a real quote? But I verified it. It is in David Rockefeller's memoir, and he says, I can more or less do it verbatim, some people believe that my family and me are working against the interests of the United States, trying to implement a one world government. If that's the charge, I am guilty and proud of it. And so you can't believe these guys are against America. They are against America. You'd think they'd be grateful for the billions of dollars that they've made here in the system of capitalism with all of the freedom we have. But they're not grateful, and they want to destroy the country. And once you realize their goal is to transfer power and control to international institutions, everything makes sense. The border makes sense. The inflation makes sense. Every tragedy befalling our country right now starts to make sense when you realize that they don't love America like you and I do. And so solutions, you get to the end of researching something like this, and I'll admit the solutions section is pretty thin. And I tell people, that's somebody else's book. I'm doing the exposing book. But I will say this, there are a number of solutions. First of all, I have a lot of hope. I know that after all of that, it's like, how the heck do you have hope? I've got a lot of hope, because look at this room right here. I mean, this is a packed house. I'm very happy to see this many people, liberty-minded people, Kennedy, MAGA hats. Both guys are very much anti-establishment. That's what we need, more anti-establishment sentiment throughout the entire country, especially in California. So good for you guys. But I can see, like, these moves are moves of desperate people. The Controligarchs are desperate right now. It may not seem like it. They seem strong. It's actually like a Sun Tzu thing, appear strong when you're weak. And so I think that they are rushing through things like the pandemic treaty, the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. They're trying to cram through all of these things, force this AI revolution, get everybody out of work, because they're desperate. They know that we have a great awakening happening worldwide. You saw it in Argentina with Milei. You see it in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders, and all over the world, Slovakia, countries everywhere, people are waking up. The war on farmers, it wasn't televised, the revolution wasn't televised, but in France, Germany, in Netherlands, the farmers flooded the city centers. They were spraying cow manure all over the government buildings. I firmly believe that the farmers and the truckers are actually going to help save us. And so this wake up is happening. So yeah, let's hear it for the farmers and the truckers. And so what can you do? You need to spread this information. You need to tell as many people as you can in a nonpartisan way. I mean, the reason I wrote this book is to appeal across the spectrum to the Bernie crowd. Yeah, the millionaires and billionaires are up to no good. Let me tell you about some of them. And also the more libertarian crowd, where it's like the government is no good. Some people believe it's the capital. Some people believe it's the politicians. My belief is that it's both, and that we outnumber them 1,000,000 to 1 worldwide. So we can win this thing, and I'm very optimistic about it. And I guess with that, I'll take questions.
Seamus's book is, I have scribbled all over this book. I didn't get to show him, but I have just underlined and circled, and by the time my husband got to it, I don't know if he could even read it, because there were so many comments that I had in here. This is probably one of the most well-researched books that we've ever featured at the forum. It's really tremendous. There really are at least 72 pages, I think maybe more, of footnotes. So what you learn from Seamus is the incredible history of this and how long this has been going on. I think many of us feel like we should be able to do something and fix it now, but this is absolutely decades, actually since the 1800s. Seamus, do you want to say something about sort of the depth of it and the not just the depth, but the historical depth, but also all the relationships that you discovered?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people say well, these guys don't get together in like smoke-filled rooms and plot, the conquest of humanity. And yes, they absolutely do. The Good Club is the whole book opens with the meeting of the Good Club, and you're stunned. I mean, you read about it, it's like this is sort of like movie villain stuff. I mean, of course, we've all heard Klaus Schwab talk before. He sounds like a Bond villain parody. But yeah, I mean, like the meeting of the Federal Reserve was some Rockefeller-type guys and several others on Jekyll Island. It was a very small crew that put in place the central bank system, which is really a system of total financial control. The central bank digital currency system, it was a meeting, I talk about it in Chapter 7, of central bankers all around the world getting together. They had this exercise very much like the Event 201 pandemic planning exercise. They called this a financial pandemic. And they warned that people like in this room, I mean, specifically like MAGA hat wearing, Kennedy hat wearing types are going to cause a crash. So they have this scenario and they all are kind of like, what do we do? They're going to plot, people like us are going to crash the economy by, let's say, causing a run on banks. Obviously, none of us are planning that, but what do? They put in place contingencies, and that's the central bank digital currency. And so they're constantly getting together and planning for over 100 years. One of the connections, I guess, a lot of people don't know about, some maybe know, but Henry Kissinger was Klaus Schwab's mentor. And I'll start with the Rockefellers. So the Rockefellers are sort of like the number one villain in this book. John D. Rockefeller was probably the greatest capitalist the world's ever known, obsessive about delivering a better and better product for less and less money. It was really his son, Junior, J.D. Jr., who was the guy who started getting, it's hard to live in that shadow. I mean, to live up to the expectations of being as good as your father when nobody was as good a capitalist or oil man as John D. Sr. So what does John D. Jr. do? He becomes what he thinks is the greatest philanthropist. And through that, through the course of that, that's really when the Rockefeller Foundation is founded. They are putting tons and tons of money into vaccine research. They discover that by claiming to solve viruses or diseases, basically every country would turn over the keys to the kingdom to the Rockefeller Foundation. This is starting in 1904. And it just so happened that at the same time as they were coming in and saying, hey, we can solve your smallpox or your yellow fever or the Spanish flu or whatever disease they were focused on, those countries would open up and turn it into like a quasi-governmental entity, like the departments of health all around the world were run by the Rockefellers, including in China, 50 years before the Chinese Communist Party was founded. And so the Rockefellers really helped the Chinese Communist Party get off the ground. David Rockefeller was very complimentary of Mao, said, some mistakes were made, 100 million people or whatever killed. But this system here is really great. It's very efficient. You actually hear Klaus Schwab say the same thing. So Henry Kissinger was an agent of the Rockefellers. He was, before he was Secretary of State, before he was the world's greatest diplomat, he's actually, probably one of the most well-connected people in modern history. As Winston told me earlier, it was actually a very interesting story about him. But young Kissinger was a Rockefeller. He was the director of the Special Studies Project for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. It was this project that led to a book called, what is it? It's like the future, the prospect for America. This was read by world leaders all around, everywhere. And this was the kind of thing, depopulation type stuff. He had a number of programs talking about how to bring down birth rates. This is back when people were having 3 and 4 kids. And they were very successful in these programs. Well, before he became Secretary of State, he went on to Harvard, Kissinger that is. And at Harvard, he taught a young student named Klaus Schwab. This is in 1968. So this is really ancient connections here. Kissinger helped the World Economic Forum get off the ground. It was actually also another organization tied to the Rockefellers called the Club of Rome. Has anybody heard of the Club of Rome? Yeah, the Club of Rome was very instrumental in getting the World Economic Forum off the ground. And if you've read anything about the limits to growth, this was the original climate propaganda before global warming and before global cooling and holes in the ozone layer. The first thing was called limits to growth, and it says, if we don't stop having kids, we're all going to die. It was the hockey stick graph that population, if it continues at this rate, the planet's going to run out of resources. They came up with things like the spaceship analogy, a lot of people learned in school, or the lifeboat analogy, where it's like you're stuck on a lifeboat, and would you off the pregnant woman, or would you, who's going to use the most resources? Who do you get rid of? And so really sick anti-human stuff that they've been up to for decades. I could go on and on and on. I don't know if that answers the question, though.
Yeah. Well, it's a good start. It's a good start. There are a couple questions about the election. So how many layers and players, how much dark money, and what about election fraud? What's your sense about that?
Yeah, I mean, we are fighting a massive uphill battle. Soros is in this book. I know you guys are probably more familiar with Laurene Powell Jobs than other people in the country, but she's the new Soros. Did you have Alex Marlowe come talk?
No.
No, you should have him come talk.
Okay.
But Laurene Powell Jobs is in this book. She's the new Soros. They are pumping hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going to make Zuckerbucks look like child's play. There's good news on that front. A lot of states are banning Zuckerbucks, that it would be the billionaire funding of election apparatus. But still, I mean, there's so many different ways. I mean, Soros is the prime example. Everybody's heard of George Soros. I mean, I'm sure you've even heard of Alex Soros, the heir to the empire. But I mean, there's so many ways that they can do it the legitimate way, which is just pouring money into campaigns. He's already the number one, he and his son are already the number one founder. But then we're seeing these illegitimate ways, which is funding the prosecutors to trump up, 91 charges and try to bury Donald Trump under the prison. That's a fairly illegitimate way to get a candidate out of the race. But then they also have the even more illegitimate ways, which is like the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. All of these NGOs and dark money groups, crew, is leading the charge to get Donald Trump removed from the ballot. Of course, they're against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And so, yeah, what do we do about it? It's a great question. We need to spread the word because, again, we outnumber these guys, and you need to wake more people up. I believe that a 2016 stunner type election can happen again. I don't believe that they'll be able to cheat the same way twice. It was kind of like a pandemic. A lot of people even, it's just like, oh, I guess because of the pandemic we need to have mass mail-in ballots and they got to stop the counts. I don't think they can pull that off again. And I think if it's slightly more legitimate than 2020, that we've got some hope. But you can't take anything for granted. You can't get despondent and say, what's the point of voting? That is a losing mindset. If you know anybody who's saying there's no point in voting, slap them and wake them up. And, we've got to outvote the fraud.
It's an interesting question about the role of British intelligence behind the depopulation and their relationship with Rockefeller, Hitler, and the Huxley brothers. What I was so struck by in reading Seamus's book is the relationships. They're just extraordinary, and they're a little bit shocking.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, the Tavistock Institute and the Wellcome Trust, all the way up through today with the pandemic, the Wellcome Trust is funded by royal family money and intelligence money. It's the same thing with China. We think that it's like our government, it's like the governments are against us, a lot of them. There's good people in the government, but they're totally outnumbered by the bad people from the intelligence agencies, from the so-called deep state. The UK has had a deep state much longer than we have, and so that's true.
Here's a question about Elon Musk, friend or foe of liberty?
Well, and we were talking about this at dinner. So I applaud Elon Musk for so many things that he's done. He has been a true beacon for free speech. I can tell that Twitter, not for me personally, I'm still in the penalty box or shadow banned or whatever, but a lot of other people are getting to enjoy the freedom of speech and reach. That said, I'm very skeptical of Elon Musk, as I am with anybody, and so I decided, is he a net positive? At the moment, I believe he's a net positive. I believe that more and more people are being woken up by the accounts that are not banned on Twitter that are allowed to speak. But again, the Neuralink thing, I think anybody who wants to put microchips in brains you should be wary of. And he has really learned, I mean, they always go with the emotional appeal. Like so who could be against a paralyzed person being able to walk or talk or any of these things that Neuralink purports to be able to do? But if you look back at like what he talked about, I mean, he's really amped about psychic text messaging and beaming. I mean, not him specifically, but the people with like beaming porn into your brain or something. Like there's like in video gaming, like where you can just think of like, and all of this kind of stuff. And so he claims that he's uploaded his brain to the cloud. I don't know how you could verify that, but I mean that's the ambition, and really what it comes down to with the brain-computer interfaces and this transhumanism stuff is we're all united by one thing: we're going to die, and that has worried people for a long time. And no matter how much money you have, you're going to die, and a lot of people have a hard time confronting that. And so when you have enough money, you think, well, maybe I can prevent that. So that's what the brain-computer interfaces are about, is uploading your brain and creating an avatar and living forever. It's actually what Elon Musk says the mRNA technologies are about. Is he says in a video, kind of a rare video if you haven't seen it, but he says with mRNA you can, with the right gene sequence, you could turn yourself into a butterfly or reverse aging. And so a lot of this stuff is about reversing aging, living forever, because they're afraid of death. And so in a way that's a human thing to feel, but I think he's worth being skeptical about too.
One of our audience members has a question about, he says there are two analysts that dug into the Clinton Foundation and proved the corruption and tax evasion. What happened to that?
Oh, I love them. I assume they're talking about Mr. Doyle and something at hand, two Irish guys. The Clinton Foundation whistleblowers, they're still at it.
Are they still alive?
They are still alive. Well, there's well, it depends. I mean, which are you talking about? Hastings, or are you talking about Monica Peterson, who died in Haiti from suicide? No, there's a lot of people on the Clinton body count list. Vince Foster twice. What did he shoot himself twice? There was a guy who just in Arkansas who was found hanging and dead from a shotgun blast to the chest, and the police ruled that one a suicide. And he was somehow tied to Jeffrey Epstein. So
I knew it. I knew we were not going to get through this without mentioning Jeffrey Epstein, right?
Well, and I didn't get to. Jeffrey Epstein does make a big appearance in the book. He was very close with Bill Gates, and a lot of information about how to get the client list is in the book. But I won't spend time on that. The Clinton Foundation whistleblowers are heroes, the ones that I know.
Actually, I think the audience will be a little bit interested in Gates' social life.
So how did Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates get linked up? I mean, they have a lot of shared interests. Overpopulation, curbing overpopulation. It's actually interesting. Jeffrey Epstein, so Bill Gates says that in order to fix the problem of overpopulation, you need to cure a lot more diseases, which doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Jeffrey Epstein felt differently, especially so Bill Gates is in Africa. He's curing malaria, curing all these diseases, allegedly also killing a lot of people, like in India with the HPV experiments. But Jeffrey Epstein had a much more pragmatic view. He's like, why don't you just let them all die? And so they kind of debated about that. I think Jeffrey Epstein, if you are an overpopulation freak, Jeffrey Epstein's position makes more sense on that. But no, they also were interested in CRISPR and gene editing and just really creepy stuff. Jeffrey Epstein had dreams of, quote, seeding the planet with his DNA by impregnating scores of young women, young girls, I'm not sure. But how they got linked together. So Jeffrey Epstein was a big client of J.P. Morgan, which is, by the way, J.P. Morgan Chase, which is really a merger of the Rockefeller Chase Manhattan Bank. So that connection goes back a very long way. But Jeffrey Epstein was J.P. Morgan's one of their star clients. He brought in all kinds of money to the bank, lots of billions of dollars transferring through the wire service into his J.P. Morgan account. And at the bank, the relationship manager was a guy named James Staley, who has been accused of heinous acts. I won't make you lose your dinner here, but really, really gruesome stuff by multiple Epstein victims. So James Staley managed the Epstein account. J.P. Morgan wanted to partner with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on a initiative that actually dealt with mRNA. This is in 2010. By 2012, J.P. Morgan and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have this global health investment fund. And James Staley has the brilliant idea, well, why don't we bring Jeffrey Epstein in on this? And Jeffrey Epstein very much wanted to meet Bill Gates. James Staley made that happen. He introduces him to Bill Gates. Bill Gates flies around on the jet. They meet many times, I think more than 20. This is actually what Melinda Gates cites as the reason for their divorce. And it's a very interesting thing because we actually see how the Epstein business plan worked. He would get himself close to people like Bill Gates and many other billionaires and very powerful people. And he actually became aware of an affair with an of-age woman. I believe she was a ballerina. And so Bill Gates, I guess, had this affair with this ballerina. Jeffrey Epstein came to know about it somehow and decided to sort of extort Bill Gates or else he would reveal it. And so this is how the blackmail honeypot operation works. And so anyway, that's sort of the gist of the Bill Gates relationship with Epstein. But what I found in the process of going through all of this is that a lot of people talk about the Epstein client list and they talk about the flight logs and like there's like some list of his clients somewhere and maybe he had it in a diary or a little black book. And the thing about the little black book and the flight logs, so Senator Marsha Blackburn, she's trying to get all the flight logs, and people want to get the list. We actually know where the list is, and J.P. Morgan has it, and they've admitted to having it in court in November 2023, so not even 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. A lot of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, he was then dead or missing or wherever he is. A lot of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein sued J.P. Morgan because he was gone, and they said, well, that was his bank, so like you guys had to know about it. And sure enough, the bank paid a combined settlement of $65 million, over $300 million, in order to avoid going to trial. And so that tells you something. They sort of threw James Staley under the bus. He got fired. He's disgraced, but not in jail. And in this process of avoiding trial, they essentially admit that they were aware of $1 billion with a B in human trafficking transfers that went into Jeffrey Epstein's account. And so when they admit that, that means that they know, because you can't receive money from no one, the entity on the other end of the transaction. And so just like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are the only people to ever be convicted of trafficking humans to nobody, you can't receive money from nobody. So J.P. Morgan knows who the clients are, and actually the Treasury Department knows who the clients are. And so what it really tells you, the fact that we can't know this, because it should be everywhere, is that the people who were paying Jeffrey Epstein are still in charge, and that our government is totally compromised by people who were paying Jeffrey Epstein, because the FBI has this information, Treasury Department, like I said, has this information, and I'm sure a lot of other people have the information too, but we're not allowed to know. So when people talk about we need the client list, it's like we need the J.P. Morgan bank transfers, because J.P. Morgan could come clean, but of course they won't without enough pressure.
Wow. Let's talk about Davos for a minute. So what was their theme? Rebuilding trust? I love these people. They're so audacious, right? like they would literally like give you poison and say, this is, your grandmother's candy. Question, I'd like you to comment on the rebuilding trust branding, and also it's a question of how does Donald Trump fit into the Davos plan according to them? Or fit into the crowd, I guess, is the actual question up here.
Yeah, so it's obvious that they are aware that they have lost all trust and credibility by their theme, and I think that's another sign that we're winning is, they wouldn't even give us lip service before. At least they're giving us some lip service now. I think they're desperate. I think they're worried. And really, the unofficial theme of Davos this year was entirely about AI. We just saw this singularity event at the restaurant. It's like it's everywhere. It's going to be everywhere, and it's happening so fast because they know that it is the socialism machine. They know that it can lead to a total system of control. They're building digital gulags brick by digital brick using this AI these systems. And so that's what Davos was really about. They they basically said, they're going to try to rebuild trust. It's impossible. Like, we're never going to trust them again. So I don't think, as long as you guys don't trust them, I'm never going to trust them again. So I don't think I ever did. But yeah, it is comical.
I think you could pretty much assume that whatever they say, we can go with the opposite, right? I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah, 100%. And on Donald Trump, his speech, if you've watched his speech at the UN, his speech in Davos, he said we're never going to surrender to the false song of globalism. He basically, a lot of people say, oh, if you go to the World Economic Forum, you're automatically a bad person. There's a number of people who went to the World Economic Forum who are not. I think they hate Donald Trump. In fact, Klaus Schwab in the quotes in the book very much hates Donald Trump. Every single person there hates Donald Trump. That's why Mark Zuckerberg spends $400 million to make sure he doesn't get elected. So these guys are very much against Donald Trump, and it goes back to what their number one goal is. They hate nationalism. They hate strong nations, strong countries. They want globalism. They want a system of international organizations that are totally unelected and unaccountable. So that's why they hate, Milei. Milei went in there and took them to task. They hate a lot of these leaders that are rising up that are saying that, it's America first or Argentina first or, Netherlands first.
What is your hope about that? What's your hope about the populist movement worldwide? I mentioned to you that we had Geert Wilders here many years ago, and we had Bolsonaro's son.
Yes.
So where are you with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a sign of what's coming. I think Brexit was the first real symbol of a populist uprising worldwide. And then, Donald Trump was the most recent, but then you had Giorgia Meloni in Italy. Now, a lot of these people turn out to be false leaders, and I know people think that about Donald Trump and a lot of other world leaders and Milei and all, who can you trust? And I don't have the answer to that, but I do know, people, they prove who they are over time, and, some of them turn out to be not so good. But it doesn't change the fact that voters are voting for the person that they believe is anti-Davos or anti-globalism, and that's encouraging.
Is cap and trade part of this plan?
Yeah, totally.
Could you explain that?
So the way they want, I didn't get too deeply into the examples, but I could go into, they want a carbon tracking system. They want to be able to track everything, that, all of the carbon, and that's really all about control. If you control the energy industry through, carbon tracking and all of that and cap and trade, you control everything. Everything requires energy. So that's really what the whole climate change thing is about, is taking control of the energy industry. And again, it goes back to the patents, because if you, and I use the analogy of of drugs. Everybody knows that a name brand drug, something that just came to market, is really expensive. And then after 20 years or so, you get the generic and it's very cheap. That's because the patents have expired and they can't re-up it by tweaking the formula a little bit. So oil and gas and coal and carbon-based systems are basically like the generic. They have found, thanks to the Rockefellers in large part, every possible way, and even still fracking or something comes up, but they have found every possible way of exploring for, or drilling for, capturing, refining, transporting oil and gas. And that's what makes it crazy abundantly cheap. And they, for a while they said that we're hitting peak oil. That proved false. If anybody's familiar with the Paul Ehrlich population bomb and the Ehrlich-Simon wager, we're not running out of resources. The proof is everything gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, absent some artificial thumb on the scales. So oil and gas is the generic. Solar, nuclear, wind, those are all the name brands, and those all have patents. And they're tightly regulated, tightly controlled. That means that you can't have middle class, while there can be no Jed Clampett's, Beverly Hillbillies of the nuclear or wind or solar industry. It must be Bill Gates with TerraPower or Bezos or Soros or any of these other guys. And that's really what it's about. It's about controlling the energy industry. And then, of course, with the electric vehicles, we just had Congress, our U.S. Congress passed a kill switch mandate late last year. The electric vehicles, that's really all about tracking movements, the ability to remotely shut down your vehicle. They claim it's to stop drunk driving, which is sort of ridiculous. So,
Seamus, may I ask you a question about that? Because there's some interest about that. So last month we learned that we all have digital twins, right? And now evidently there are digital twin cities, right? But I recently learned that there's also, that I have an ESG score, basically. And why do I have an ESG score? Because the corporations have an ESG score, right? And their ESG score is now going to be based on your ESG score. So they are literally finding a way to control, to look at how you're driving, to send that data back if you're braking harshly or you're speeding. They have a way to send that back to the car companies who are sending it to insurance companies. Insurance companies now have that data on how you're driving, but you didn't give it to them. They weren't in the car, or at least you thought they weren't in the car. It seems to me that this is sort of like how they did with what they did with vaccines. They're saying, oh no, the government's not doing it. But isn't it similar to the mandates in that they're pushing this through corporations?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
That's exactly right. And this is really the system that China pioneered with the Rockefeller Foundation's help and with a lot of corporate interests' help. I mean, China did not come up with this all on their own. They did not invent capitalism. Actually, the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab went to China in 1979 and brought a bunch of economists and taught them how to be quasi-communist, quasi-capitalist. So it was very much by design, and you hear all kinds of euphemisms for public-private partnerships. The World Economic Forum is all about public-private partnerships. And really, actually, I think Mussolini had the quote where it's like it's the merger of the state with corporate power. It's fascism. So they are the fascists. And yeah, they're using the idea that, oh, no, these are just companies and they have a right to do this to you, but they're totally in bed with one another, the corporations and the governments, and they're all on the same team. I mean, the mega corporations. I mean, they're all, if you name every Fortune 500 company is a World Economic Forum member. And
everyone.
Yeah, I mean, maybe very limited exceptions, but yeah, right down the list. I calculated the total value by market cap of the World Economic Forum. It's easily over $30 trillion. I mean, it fluctuates as the market fluctuates, but if you think about that, I mean, you've got BlackRock, that's 10 trillion under management. State Street and Vanguard are another 12 trillion. That's 22. I mean, we're getting closer to the entire GDP of the United States. You add in all the FANGs, or Facebook and Meta and Amazon and Netflix and Google, you're up over $30 trillion. That is more than the GDP of the most wealthy nation, China or United States. And so that's not all at their disposal, obviously, and of course we can print money apparently endlessly, and so it's not like a direct comparison, but you think about that, they have more power economically speaking in a lot of ways than whole countries, many whole countries. And so it's my belief that they are steering the governments, not the other way around, the corporations and the World Economic Forum members, and people like Klaus Schwab, I believe, is a total front man. He's not really actually calling the shots. It's a lot of the people like the Rockefeller Foundations and Kissinger until he passed away, those types.
We know that they did a war game on the pandemic before it happened, right? And it was played out exactly. I mean, their example was exactly what unfolded, so it's rather suspicious. I understand they did this with cyber warfare as well. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, they had a number of pandemic war games. I mean, going back to the early 2000s.
I'm sorry, but something like collective strength or something?
Yeah, collective. Yeah, so okay. Collective strength was the side. Well, so they've had a number of those too. But they've been doing pandemic, like virus, disease war games for 20-something years or more, really. But then only very recently have they been having cyber pandemic war games. And so Klaus Schwab, he calls it the cyber pandemic, and we're going to have to get digitally vaccinated. And it's like, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, they have no shame, really. You should watch the video that Klaus Schwab talks about the coming cyber pandemic. And then, so they have Cyber Polygon, that happens every year. And that's hosted by the World Economic Forum. It's sort of a subsidiary, like the Young Global Leaders organization that a lot of you have heard about. So Cyber Polygon is a war game about cyber, and it's, I mean, there's movies, I guess, that, there's been a few movies where it's like, that feels like maybe predictive programming or something, and there's cyber attacks happening all the time, and a lot of the ransomware stuff, and they never find the guys who do it. But of course they're stress testing the system, and of course they can shut it all down if they decide to. Collective strength was the central banker one, where they said that it's like a cyber attack on the financial system. And they had a number of scenarios. So one of them was the people in MAGA hats causing a run on banks. I mean, you read the name as like a very popular news host, like on the right wing, and you could tell they're probably talking about Tucker Carlson, who around the time was talking about like, maybe you should pull your cash out of the banks. And so they blame all of us. And that's the hilarious thing about it, is like they're running these simulations where we're the enemy. And so that's just very unsettling, I would say, because I'm not telling anybody to pull the cash out of the banks, but if and when the cyber pandemic begins, they'll of course blame all of us for it. And I would encourage you to look at the collective strength thing. Was very suspicious. There's almost no reporting on it. It's very much like the Good Club meeting, where they give you like a little bit and then don't tell you anything else. So.
Boy, we have so many questions, and I want to get you to sign books, but I'm going to ask you a couple more because, by the way, congratulations. I understand Controligarchs was the word of the year in Australia. Is that accurate?
Yes.
How cool is that?
I know. New word of the year. So yeah, thank you. That was on Sky News. I was just looking and I saw it pop up, and I was like, wait, what? And they found it and published it. And so there's a great piece in the Spectator Australia by Kel Richards, who's Australia's wordsmith. I guess he's the renowned person who comes up with, I don't know, he's the dictionary master. He's some sort of credentialed wordsmith. So he did a piece on Controligarchs in the Australia Spectator.
Well, I think we have a lot of concerns about convenience, seducing particularly young people. I think we have a lot of concerns about the food being taken over. I'm personally amazed that Seamus read every one of Hunter Biden's emails and can just stand up here and still be breathing and having gotten through that, as well as the Clintons' tax records. There's so much in this book to captivate you. But I guess one of the things I don't want to leave here without hearing your opinion on is there's so much dark money that evidently is influencing us, right? All of us. There have to be things that I believe, that you guys believe, that you believe today, maybe not so true, right? What do you think the next revelation is going to be about how we've been deceived, lied to, and manipulated? What's on the horizon?
That is a tough question. There's just so many things to choose from. Well, I heard just recently that viruses aren't real. But I find a lot of things fun, just to think about. Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, flat Earth obviously isn't real. The Earth is round. I've traveled by plane and seen it. But I still, what I find about these things, the ever-growing number of so-called conspiracy theories, is that it encourages me. I mean, it's kind of like, wait, there's all these nutty people out there and they think that we haven't been to the moon and like space isn't real and all this kind of stuff. But it's like, I mean, what it really shows is that people are so skeptical of the official narratives that they won't trust anything. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think we should treat everything that the government tells us with a healthy dose of skepticism, and we should verify everything ourselves. You don't take my word for it. You go to the endnotes. And if you get a book from somebody and you go to the endnote section, or where there should be an endnote section and there aren't any endnotes, you know, you might just save some time and not read it, because if they don't provide the sources, then you might not be able to trust it. There's so many opinions out there, and I honestly couldn't predict. Like, what do we all? I don't know that any of us in the room believe the same things totally. So that's a very hard thing to predict. But that's a good thing. Is free thought and critical thinking. That's it's important. So teach other people that. Teach your kids that. Question everything.
Good. So Seamus has a quote in his book by Abraham Lincoln, and it's basically saying that the destruction of America would not come from abroad. That danger, he said, must spring up amongst us. Please use what you learned here tonight to pass on the baton of liberty. It's so terribly important. Thank you, Seamus. Seamus brings the receipts.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.